Hi, it's Liz. I am here to give you the next installment of my extremely long bipolar story. I didn't realize kind of when I started mapping this out just how long it would be, but there's really a lot. There's really a lot that happened, and there's a lot that led up to the thrilling conclusion of me finally getting properly medicated. And we're not going to get there in this video, but we are going to get through some stuff such as hospitalizations, talking about psychosis. We're going to, what are we going to do? Talk about meds. It's going to be great. So let's get started. Okay. So when I last left off, I said that my cousin was kind of shipping me off back to Portland after I'd gone on an impromptu trip so that I could get treatment because he knew that I was having some kind of a mental health crisis. Now, before I get into what the hospital was like and all of that, I want to describe a little bit more what psychosis is and how it differs from mania. This is kind of a challenging topic because from my experience, mania just really naturally becomes psychosis. Like it's pretty seamless. But as much as you can make a distinction, here's basically what it is. In mania, I mean, when you have full-blown mania, not hypomania, which is like having extra energy, being more creative and inspired, being charming, more so than normal, just having all this vital energy, having a lot of ideas, talking a lot, maybe being a bit more sexual, doing some making some sort of relatively minor impulsive decisions, being driven. This is all stuff that is basically celebrated. People love hypomanic people. And it kind of, that attention feeds the hypomania too, because, I mean, I think I even looked better when I was hypomanic a lot of the time. I'm not sure exactly why that is, just the feeling vital, or it would somehow magically be easier to do my makeup really, really well or put together a great outfit and really stand out in a good way. I just got a lot of positive attention. Everybody laughed at my jokes. I had all this confidence. People love that. People love all that stuff. Which in turn sort of gives you more of that energy. Now, where it starts to turn into full-blown mania, at least for a lot of people, is when you start missing sleep. You start having, you feel like, you don't need to sleep as much because you're so energetic. It's hard to sleep. And then slowly you're really just not sleeping enough, and maybe you're not sleeping at all. And that's really hard on your brain. When that kind of stuff starts to happen, that's when you know you're in full-blown mania. And when somebody's manic, they get to a point where it's no longer socially acceptable. The ideas become a bit too grandiose, where it's like, the intensity of your emotion gets to a point that makes other people uncomfortable, probably. The intense joy and intense anger, especially when, you have all these plans, you have all these ideas, and you're trying to do it, and then something gets in your way or something doesn't work out. It's probably not going to work out at some point because your ideas are starting to not be that good. And, you just crash into anger. That's still mania. It's not pleasant. It's hard to totally explain, but it's like when somebody's gone into full-blown mania, there's something about them that feels off. Yeah, mania, it's a little scary, and you don't totally know why, maybe. They might not be saying anything that's completely out there, but there's something about their enthusiasm that seems off balance at that point. Then you start getting into the delusions. You might start getting into a place of fear, paranoia. Although not necessarily, you might a person who's in full-blown mania and heading into psychosis might still be pretty euphoric, but they're getting to a point where their ideas are getting really far away from reality, and they're coming to some conclusions that are pretty bizarre. The classic kinds of things are like, you think you're God, you think you can fly. You start getting, I had a lot of conspiracy theories at this point. And it's not necessarily that you're afraid, but you feel like you know all of this stuff that other people don't know. You feel very special because the feeling is very special. And it's very grandiose. And you get into a space that can be, kind of beyond narcissistic. Just very, very, very self-centered and very self-involved and very grandiose. So as you head into psychosis, you get to a point that's kind of just classic, like, crazy person. Psychotic, it sounds scary, and it is scary. It is scary to be around somebody who's psychotic, mostly because you don't necessarily know what they're going to do, and they tend to have extreme reactions to things. They have extreme ideas about things. However, it's important to remember that people who are actually psychotic are rarely violent. So it has that. People have associated psychotic with, like, psycho, with the term psycho, but usually the kind of serial killer stereotype, they're not always sociopaths or psychopaths. And I know these are outdated terms, like antisocial personality disorder. I know that they're often people with antisocial personality disorder, although not always. But that's a very different thing. And, also there are many people with antisocial personality disorder that are not predatory in that way. So that's a whole other conversation. Point being, people with psychosis are rarely violent in that kind of extreme way, but we definitely can be. I'm not psychotic right now, but people who are experiencing psychosis, it's usually a temporary experience, and they can be angry, they can lash out, they can threaten, and they can be violent, but usually not in such extreme ways as killing somebody. Usually it's more minor kinds of assault or threats or property damage. It's understandable to get scared, but you don't need to be scared on that level. Psychotic people are not usually going to kill you. Anyway, so yeah, I'd say what mostly characterizes psychosis is the paranoia, the delusions, the sort of feeling. I know for me, psychosis, like, the way everything felt became very intense, but also very surreal, like just very, very different from normal reality. I thought that maybe I was ascending to a more spiritual plane. I definitely thought I was God at a certain point. I definitely thought I was dead, because things look and feel so different that it's easy to come to those kinds of extreme conclusions, because it doesn't seem like everyday real life. It doesn't seem like the regular material world. I was in this state. I thought I was dead. Everything was kind of this intense symbol. Like, I wasn't able to take anything at face value. Everything became a symbol for, something in my head. As I went to the hospital, I remember I was taken. Well, first I went on the train. My cousin put me on the train, and I thought the train was bringing me to the afterlife. Then I wound up somehow, I don't know what happened in between, but I wound up in a cab. And I thought that the person driving the cab he happened to be named Travis, and I had a very close friend named Travis at the time, and I thought that that was like an avatar for him. Everything that's one of the reasons why I had a lot of experiences where I thought somebody was somebody else when I was in a psychotic state. Because if somebody even kind of reminded my brain of that person, it would make that connection. And that's really what's happening, is there's way too much pattern making going on. It's pattern recognition on overdrive. And that's where these crazy delusions start to become more and more and more complex and snowball, because you see this connection and then you see this other connection. And it's kind of like, if you ever watch the Glenn Beck show, he really reminds me, I'm not saying this as a political commentary, but honestly, he reminds me of a psychotic person. And I'm not sure if he's doing that on purpose or what, but the sorts of connections that he will draw between things, that like words kind of sound similar, so they must be connected, like that kind of thing. It's a very classic psychosis. So anyway, I got to the hospital. There was a bunch of little hiccups in me getting from the hospital that I originally went to. They transferred me across the state, or not all the way across the state, but to a different city. So that was horrible. That was, of all of the experiences I've had, probably one of the most traumatizing, the experiences I had there. It was, and I'm sure it was not nearly as bad as mental hospitals have been in previous decades in this country. It's been a horror show for a long time. It was, I can't really express how dehumanizing it was. I had the repeated experience, for example, of being basically knocked over or pushed down by a team of people while they sedated me without explaining why, and these are times when I was in a good space. The first time I was very, very calm. I was practically asleep. Was some of the first even close to sleep that I'd gotten in days. And yeah, they didn't explain anything to me. I kept asking them, what's going on? Where am I going? What are you doing? Nothing. They just held me down and they talked among themselves like I wasn't even there. I've realized, as somebody who hasn't experienced this might not seem so bad. But it's extremely objectifying and it's extremely dehumanizing. I've experienced a number of sexual assaults, and this was worse. This was worse. I still remember how it felt. And it happened a few times. And the other time I was reciting a poem to myself, and I'm sure I was getting kind of enthusiastic about it. Maybe it was not socially appropriate. So they decided it was time to push me over while I was standing up reciting this poem, and they just pushed me over. And this was also in front of a whole bunch of students. I assume student psychologists they were just watching. There's like 20 people just like watching, taking notes, while they pushed me over and injected me with a sedative of some kind against my will for no reason I could discern other than, that they thought I was being socially inappropriate. They couldn't tell me, I guess, or they just didn't feel it was necessary because they didn't feel I was fully human. That's certainly how I felt the entire time I was there. I never received any actual treatment. I was drugged many times against my will, but I never received any talk therapy, any attempt to get to know me at all, understand what I was going through or why, the triggers that had led to this psychotic event. None. Just drug me into submission. That was it. That was the only goal. And this made things much worse. This made recovery really unnecessarily difficult because, as you can maybe imagine, when you're already in a state where you're paranoid and a whole bunch of strangers are literally conspiring to do all these things to you, again, without your consent or knowledge, even. They're controlling you, they're drugging you. What the fuck do you think is going to happen? How do you think people are going to feel? I thought that all of the doctors and nurses working there were aliens. And that belief did not go away for several months. So, I don't know what else was going on at that hospital, but I mean, the whole time I was there, I was terrified. I thought that I was going to be like vivisectioned. I thought maybe the whole thing was like actually a spaceship and we were already in space. I was terrified. So then what happened was it was a 5-day hold. What that means is that at the end of the 5 days, unless you meet certain criteria, you may face a commitment hearing, and I did because I was refusing to take medication. I was not cooperating with them at all. I went to this commitment hearing. I mean, luckily, I had a good lawyer who is a friend of my family. So that's, privilege. I was still pretty bonkers. I remember at that hearing, I was drawing eyes on my hands and then putting my hands like behind my back so that I could see the people behind me because I was pretty sure that there were aliens back there. Yeah. So they discharged me, or they didn't commit me, and they just let me out on my own recognizance. I remember walking out the courthouse on my own. For the next, I don't know, month or so, I went back to live at my house. And bear in mind, my house I live with a cocaine dealer who is, unbeknownst to me, I think at that point, starting to smoke crack. It's a chaotic environment. It's the only little slice of peace that I have, though. I have my room. I can be in my room where I made these wild art projects that I kind of wish somebody had taken pictures of, but maybe not. It might be kind of triggering. Because I just drew all over the walls, and it's crazy stuff. There were a lot of people coming in and out. It was just everybody involved was not in a good place. I'll say that. And we were trying to make the best of it. Eventually, I pissed off the big Coke boss, who also happened to be the landlord. Long story. And that got me kicked out. That got me threatened. My life threatened by gangsters, and I got kicked out. And I realize how this sounds, but this is true. This is verified by other people who were there and of, relatively sound mind. This was not like my delusions. However, they became the seeds of my delusions. I wound up having, because for a while there, I was functionally manic again. I wasn't really psychotic for a little bit. But after that happened, after I lost my place to live, after the little tiny bit of stability that was offered there was gone, and I was homeless. And I was just wandering the streets being super manic and like meeting random people. And I started imagining all of these gang wars because I'd experienced this, I'd had this experience living with people who were part of a gang. So this, especially after having them threaten me, I mean, I understand certainly why that stoked my paranoia, but suddenly it was like I thought everybody was part of these gangs and had all of these ideas about what politics were going on in the city, and you know who was trying to kill me and weird stuff. And it got worse and worse, and then eventually I wound up back in a hospital again thanks to my family. And this time it actually worked out pretty well. This was a good hospital experience. And the big things that made a difference for me were that people talked to me like a human being. That even though I was really delusional and really doing and saying inappropriate and wild things, that they still would directly say things like, well, this thing that you're doing right now is not really appropriate. It makes people feel kind of uncomfortable, so maybe you can do this instead. And I'd be like, well, I don't really get it, but okay, I'll try, you know? Um, because just because people are having a mental health crisis doesn't mean they're not people. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It doesn't mean they can't understand basic things, especially if you treat them like a human being. And that's a big deal when you're paranoid. If you get even the slightest whiff that somebody doesn't value you, um, you feel like they're gonna, dissect you in your sleep. So it makes a big difference to have people who are compassionate and respectful, even if you can't make all your own decisions. Blah blah blah. I mean, you're still having a mental health crisis, but you can be treated like a human being. You can be at least given knowledge of what's going on, even if you aren't in a place to make a decision about it yourself. And that's what these people did for me. They connected with me, um, and they made me feel respected. And instead of drugging me against my will, they they just talked to me about, these are the reasons I think that this drug would help you, and it's your choice. And they persuaded me. So I wound up taking Abilify. I didn't have to do another commitment hearing. I was able to go to live with my parents and take Abilify for a while. I wasn't instantly cured. This misconception is something that actually wound up causing a lot of drama in my life for the next month or two, because there were people who were under the impression that if I had been discharged from the hospital, I must be sane. And that's not how it works. That first commitment hearing, like I said, I was still really, really bonkers. And the reason that I wasn't committed was that I wasn't found to be a danger to myself or others. And that's the law in Oregon. It's not easy to commit people. It's not easy to keep people on hold. So just because somebody has been discharged doesn't mean they're all better. And you need to manage your expectations. It took me months, even on the medication. The medication certainly helped. The medication was, I think, huge for me, but it still took a good, I'm guessing, about 3 months of being on the medication and being in a safe environment for me to actually get to the point where my mind had settled down and I could recognize that the things that I had believed were delusions. And for some people, it takes longer. It's not overnight. The pills are not magic. And even after I realized that these specific things I believed were delusions, my thinking was still troubled for a long time after that. I still had kind of residual symptoms from the psychosis that lasted a long time after that. what happened next was, well, I was staying with my family and then with my parents, and I got to a point where I needed a little bit more independence than they were emotionally able to give me. So, by the grace of God, I was able to live with a few of my friends who I'm still very thankful for them for taking me in. I'm thankful for my parents that they thought of this arrangement. They had to deal with me at a time where I was not exactly, at least the way I remember it, I was not exactly flying off the handle. Like I wasn't gonna break all their stuff or I don't know, do something totally wild. But I definitely had a lot of weird and bad ideas. And I recognize that it's hard, especially having been on the other end of it with a number of my friends. Like I have a lot of friends who've experienced psychosis and things like that. And it's challenging to be around somebody who's thinking in those ways, especially because they tend to start latching onto ideas that like kind of come from the nether regions of their psyche, like the kinds of things that most people don't talk about honestly, in a way that's like, I wouldn't blame people for writing me off. I wouldn't. So anyway, that really helped, just having a little bit of independence and having some support from friends. It made a big difference for me. After I finally came down from being psychotic, I pretty quickly stopped taking the medication, even though I was supposed to keep taking it, because it was making me feel so horrible after it's like I didn't really need it anymore because I wasn't psychotic, but it was making me feel like absolutely like a non-person, like a corpse, like an animated corpse. I don't know how to explain it. It's a horrifying feeling to look in the mirror and feel like you don't even see yourself. Like you're not even there. It really makes you want to die. It just makes you want to die. It's the level of numbing, because a lot of what antipsychotics do is they numb you, because when you're psychotic you're kind of all over the place and you're not regulating your emotions in a normal way, so you have to kind of dampen it down. So it was great for that, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying antipsychotics are bad. It's just after a while it was making things worse, and then I just had a depression anyway after that. For about a year I was mostly depressed, with a few little hypomanic maybe episodes. But I didn't realize that there were other medication options that I could take long term. I I kind of thought that was my one experience with medication. Well, that and being drugged in my sleep and, stuff like that. So I was not feeling very positive about it. And I just didn't know what the options were. And I didn't actually have health coverage. So instead of taking some kind of mood stabilizer, I just kind of dealt with it. And a lot of the way I dealt with it was kind of classic self-medicating. I started, at that point, I was some of my only friends that I had left that I hadn't, you know, threatened and scared and alienated in some way, were basically like my friends on LiveJournal, which is horrifying to look back on. And my friends who were really into hard drugs. And so we basically, I'd take heroin when I was feeling, hypomanic. Because at this point, I'm like kind of scared of being manic because I don't want what just happened to happen again. And then, a lot of cocaine when I was depressed. And this is when I really got into cocaine, not when I lived with the coke dealer. I was actually pretty moderate about my use. But when I was depressed and it was the only way I could get out of bed, yeah, I did a lot of it. I got a job, and at first I was spending pretty much all my money on drugs, but it got me out of the house, and that was really good, actually. It wound up slowly really helping my depression. It was a simple job, very repetitive, but that was actually really good. And I think looking back, I think part of why that suited me so much was more the autism stuff, like just doing a repetitive task. I was pretty good at it, and I'd come home and my mind would feel pretty clear. And so I didn't need the drugs quite as much. I was still doing drugs, so. And eventually I started to make some friends again. Some of my old friends that I had alienated started to sort of cautiously get back in touch. And, by about a year later, I was in a much better space, and I moved out of my parents' house. And that's where I'll leave off. So thanks for listening to this installment of me sharing these excruciatingly painful parts of my life. I hope this serves some purpose. If you want to hear the rest of the story, I think there's going to be one more installment. Please subscribe, and I'll see you soon.